denizens of the night. Welcome to another episode of the macabre, the terrifying. Broadcasting live from math class, I will be your guide through the witching hours. Tonight, we'll delve deeper into what's going on at that freaky school. In episode 1, a marauder was discovered skulking around school grounds, and a team of rather lupine guards were dispatched to handle the situation. They dropped to all fours and ran like dogs into the forest. Shortly after that, there was a haunting scream, and then everything returned to normal. Too normal, if you ask Mr. Vermeil. He was told to drop the whole thing and return to business as usual. Now, though, he finds himself hunted in his own home by a strange and electric force, and the mysteries of his workplace and the children who go there begin to unfurl. These stories are parts 2 and 3 of the 5-part series called I'm a Teacher at a School for Children Who Aren't Quite Human, and were written by No Mass 39.
It's crazy what the human mind can adapt to if it's determined enough. I'm not some moron from a horror movie who goes poking his nose into every dark crawl space when he hears a noise. When weird things happen here at school, I don't even offer them a second glance. I'm like a horse with blinders on, always looking ahead, never getting distracted. Something terrible may be going on here behind the scenes, but I figured that if I just minded my own business and focused on my work, it would never touch me. And that tactic actually worked. Until last night. The moment I got to collapse on the couch at the end of every day was the only thing keeping me going. Once I was home, after all, I was certain I was safe from whatever was going on at work. I'd officially made it through another day. I'd been recuperating from my shift in standard fashion, wasting my life on the couch watching TV and drowning my woes in cheap beer, listening to the rain pounding on my roof, when something suddenly slapped me awake from my drunken stupor. The mention of the name William. I popped up in an instant, staring at the news report as if spellbound. They'd found his hand. And, just as Katie had hoped, it was lacking all of its fingernails. Crews were being assembled to scout the woods for the rest of his body, and I prayed their search would lead them to the school. No dice. The hand had been found on a cliffside dozens of miles away. No foul play was suspected, only the ravages of nature. I watched as a forensic scientist speculated that a bear or coyotes either killed him or consumed his body after death by some other cause, judging by the hints of tooth marks along the... Cut to static. I groaned, missing the days of CRT television when all you had to do was give it a good smack on the side. I was just about to give up and go grab another beer when my phone started vibrating in my pocket like mad. One of those doorbell cameras had come with the house here, and it had just buzzed me with 6 notifications, back to back. Each read the same: motion detected at front door. I opened the attached photo and found myself dumbfounded. Again, static. It looked exactly like the black and white dominating my TV screen. I didn't even know cameras could malfunction in that way. I tried to push the growing unease aside as I flicked through the photos, each as distorted as the last. Was a salesman at the door or something? If so, why couldn't I hear any knocking? And then I reached the 6th picture and gasped with such shock that I dropped my phone. It was an eye. A single eye, red and veiny and bloodshot, piercing through the static, with pupils so dilated that the iris looked almost completely black. It was as if somebody was pressing their face directly against my door camera just to stare back at me through my own screen, like they were peeking through a keyhole. I stared at my phone on the ground, my heart seizing in my chest. I knew it was just a still photo, but I couldn't help but feel I was locking eyes with something staring back at me. And then I heard crackling in my TV set and looked up to see it yet again, that very same eye staring at me from behind that blurring fuzz of static, gazing rapidly around the room before settling to meet my gaze. Its pupils dilated even further, as if excited by the sight of me. And then came a crash and roar that shook my home, and I screamed and fell to the floor, sure some demon was charging towards me. But it was only a bolt of lightning crashing down right outside my door, and my TV screen burned out, every light in my home flickering and dying. A terrible silence and darkness settling upon my living room. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone to flick on its measly little flashlight. I know I was probably just giving away my position, but I just couldn't bear to sit there in that pitch blackness, knowing something could come at me from any angle in the dark. The faint outline of that black eye seemed to have burned itself into my phone screen, but I tried to ignore it. What was I supposed to do? My every primitive instinct was screaming at me to run, like I was some deer in the woods who could sense that the wolves were circling. But how could I escape something I didn't even understand? I hid in my bedroom, with all the superstition of a child who believes hiding under a blanket would protect them from the monster in their closet, staring at my door and clutching my baseball bat like it would do anything. The static returned, outside this time. At first, I thought it was just the rain beating against my 2 windows, but then I turned and saw a hint of white light pouring through the glass. I hid just in time. Something unfathomable walked slowly past my bedroom windows, which was doubly concerning given the fact I was on the 2nd floor. It had the shape of a man, I thought, at least the roughest silhouette, but it was composed entirely of static, like a TV screen tuned to a dead channel, screeching that static screech and bathing my room in that flickering white light. Even when it passed, I stayed hidden, too scared to move, to breathe, to even think. Tears were streaming down my face. I couldn't stop shaking all over. And then I screamed and jumped to my feet when my bedroom computer screen suddenly blared to life, roaring with the crackle of static that felt like an ice pick working its way into my brain. And from that static, something began to emerge, almost like it was oozing from the computer screen before morphing into a solid shape. I dropped to my knees and covered my ears, screaming and pounding my head. Nothing worked. The static just kept getting louder and louder. There it was, floating above me. Something that mockingly disobeyed every rule of God and nature with its very existence. And through the flickering static it was composed of, I caught glimpses of eyes, thousands of them, all bloodshot and black, staring daggers into my soul. It floated ever closer, its flickering hands reaching out as if ready to settle around my neck. I remembered the way William wailed in the woods. I wondered if I'd sound similar. But when its grasp was only an inch away, it froze in its tracks, and I heard a floorboard creak from my bedroom door, which now stood ajar. It was the Hastings twins. They settled their emotionless gaze upon the impossible creature and opened their mouths to speak for the first time, but not in words. Instead, that same horrible static came rumbling up their throats in unison, and the creature crackled back at them as if they were having a conversation. No, an argument. And once it was settled, the thing hovering above me seemed to begrudgingly flicker out, like a TV set being switched off. And the Hastings, too, nodded before disappearing back into the blackness of the hallway, the sound of their footsteps stopping abruptly as if they vanished into the dark itself. The lights flicked back on. Everything went to normal in an instant. And once again, I'd been left alone to agonize after having witnessed the impossible. I don't want to go into the self-destructive spiral that was the rest of that night. Crying and dancing and drinking and stumbling around the house like I was commemorating my brush with death. I didn't know what to feel. Relieved or horrified or upset. I was crying one moment and laughing the next. But eventually, I finally settled on a single emotion. Anger. My knuckles had almost turned white from how hard I'd been gripping the steering wheel as I tore through that dark and stormy night. I slammed my brakes in front of the school and looked up at it with a swirling, drunken hatred. And there, a faint light from the headmistress's office, just like there always was, even long after everyone else had gone home for the night. It was like she never slept. The headmistress was a woman of sunken cheeks and sharp, angular features, harsh yet faultless, like she had not been born but was rather a sculpture chipped out of marble by some Renaissance master. She sat at her dreary, candle-lit desk in anticipation when I stormed in, as if she'd been expecting me. "Mr. Vermeil," she greeted. "How may I help you?" But I'd already seen that familiar, knowing look in her eyes. I scowled at her. "You know why I'm here." "Perhaps I want to hear it in your own words." "Don't do that!" I snapped at her. It drove me mad, that tone of hers. "You always speak to me like I'm some stupid child. I'm not. You aren't pulling the wool over my eyes anymore." Her brows raised almost imperceptibly. Did she not even realize she'd been doing that? Or was she just surprised I'd called her out? "My apologies." She composed herself. "Please, state your piece." I sat down across from her, collecting my thoughts. Now, I have put up with a hell of a lot for this job. Not for you, and not for the money. For the kids. But there's something wrong going on here, and I am not going to let you tell me everything's fine and dandy. Not this time. I jabbed a finger at her. Every man has his limits. And having some godforsaken thing busting into my home in the middle of the night? I am already aware of this intrusion, Mr. Vermeil, and you have my sincerest apologies. It is unprecedented in the history of this initiative," she said in that same even-handed tone. "A parent was upset with the Hunter incident from the other week and somehow deemed you worthy of the blame. The Hastings family is brand new to us, you see, and doesn't quite understand how things work here. I shall see to it that their behavior is corrected." I slammed a fist against the desk. A parent? You act like this was some botched PTA meeting. The thing that busted into my house wasn't even human. I leaned in close. Headmistress, I'm telling you for the last time. I'm not some useful idiot you can keep in the dark forever. You need to tell me what's going on here, or I walk. Simple as that. There was a long pause, and in that silence, my mind ran wild. My nerve faltered. Maybe I really am one of those morons from a horror movie, I realized. I just waltzed into the headmistress's office, all alone, and ranted about knowing far too much. If there was some sort of conspiracy going on here, what was stopping her from disappearing me at that very moment? I braced myself for those things in the security uniforms to kick down my door. But instead, the headmistress slowly stood and turned to face the window with her arms crossed behind her back, watching the raindrops roll down her window. Do you know the one thing that unites all sentient things, Mr. Vermeil? I blinked. No, I don't. The capacity for parental love, she explained. Even penguins will guard and warm their eggs for weeks. Elephants will nurture and rear their calves for over a decade, etc., etc. The love a parent may have for their child is one of the very few ineffable qualities which unites all intelligent species. I know what you're about to say. Yes, there are true monsters out there of every kind who neglect or abuse their children. But that is their choice, their own sin. It is not innate to them. In the end, even the darkest devils or most wicked fiends are capable of making the choice to love their own children. She turned to me, and her gaze was hard and cold. I'd never seen her so on edge. Now, I want you to imagine that you are of a species that is reviled by all the world, despised and feared by all mankind, considered the stuff of nightmares and urban legend. Perhaps your reputation is well earned. Perhaps you've come to accept your life as a thing of horror, lonely, dreaded, but free. Her heels clicked against the wood floor as she stepped closer. But would you not want better for your children? Would you not want them to have at least the option of living in a world that accepts them? There was a tinge of emotion in her voice, the first I'd ever heard. That is the Integration Initiative, she concluded, gesturing to the photos littering the walls of smiling alumni. We offered you all a truce in a war older than the very mountains we're standing on. I stared at her, breathless, slowly working up the courage to ask, We? As if on cue, lightning struck, seemingly just outside her window, and lit up the room in its ghostly blue glow. And in that light, the headmistress's shadow appeared to encompass her entire half of the room. It had the shape of something not only inhuman, but which defied all natural laws. Some impossible cyclopean beast adorned by 1,000 writhing, grasping tentacles. The sort of creature I could imagine pulling entire ships down beneath the sea in some bygone era. But the lightning passed, and all it left was the woman standing before me, staring me dead in the eyes. Do you understand? What else could I do but nod? Part 3. I think it's time to face facts. I really am no different from those morons in horror movies after all. I've been doing a lot of poking my nose where it doesn't belong recently. I found something interesting in one of the old storage closets. A school photo marked September 2014. There, the headmistress was in the back, and I could almost swear I saw a smile there, which I'd previously thought impossible. But she wasn't the only face I recognized. That little girl in the bottom right? It had to be Katie. Sure, she looked different, blank and robotic and expressionless, like the Hastings were, as if she didn't quite realize how to act human yet. But it had to be her. Sure, it was chronologically impossible, but at this point I was ready to believe anything. I beckoned her over to have a seat next to me at recess, photo in hand. "Hey, Katie," I greeted. "Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to ask if this picture, well, looked familiar to you." She took one look at the photo, and the biggest grin dawned on her face. "Oh, yeah, I remember that. That was when I first got here." She held it in her hands and started laughing giddily at the sight of herself looking so stone-faced. "Look at me. I look so goofy. Man, I really had no idea what I was doing back then." "Are you sure? Because this photo, well, it was taken around 10 years ago. According to your file, you would have been a baby when this was taken." I took a deep breath. "Katie, can I ask how long you've been going to this school?" She froze. That big grin slowly fell into a frown, her voice lowering. "That's one of the things I'm not supposed to tell you." She shrugged. "Sorry." "One of the things?" Oh, God only knows just how many things even my students know about this school that I'm hopelessly unaware of. I think she could see the despair on my face because she tried offering something else in recompense. "But I can tell you about him." She pointed eagerly to the boy standing beside her in the photo, an unassuming lad with dirty blonde hair. I'd never seen him before. "You see him? His name was Elijah. He was my very first friend ever. He was the headmistress's son. Did you know that?" No, I had no idea." I shook my head, flabbergasted. I couldn't imagine that statue of a woman having any family whatsoever. "Wait, was? Can I ask what happened to him?" She looked left and right before leaning in and whispering furtively in my ear, "Hunters." And then her friends called her over, and she went right back to chasing them around the playground, leaving me with a million lingering questions. I'll be honest, I'm not coping with all of this terribly well. I'm already lapsing back into old, bad habits. There's a good reason, after all, that I was fired from my last real job. But the moment I step onto school grounds, I force that smile back on my face. Can't let the kids know that there's anything wrong with old Mr. Vermeil. But I'll be honest, sometimes when I see them, I just can't help but wonder what hides beneath those masks of human skin. Am I doing the right thing here? The social skills I'm teaching were supposed to help them live a normal life, but what if they don't end up choosing that path? What if one of them instead opts to follow in their parents' footsteps and grows up to ply the skills I taught them to lure in human prey, blend into society like a skinwalker, and pick people off one by one? Would that blood be on my hands? It was just as my doubts were at their peak when I received the first text from an unknown number. I was ready to dismiss it as typical spam, but opening it stole my breath away. It was a distant photo of me and Katie as we'd been talking, and judging from the angle, it must have been taken from inside the school. I quickly glanced up at the upper windows, but saw no sign of any silhouette staring back at me. Accompanying it was simply the words, "Do you know what she is? Do you really, truly know?" I know I should have blocked the number and immediately contacted the headmistress, but curiosity burned in my chest. I needed to know. So I replied, honestly, that I hadn't the foggiest idea. The next text came almost instantly. "This is the trail of death her mother has left behind in her wake. Study it carefully." Accompanying it was photos of several clippings from old local newspapers from various countries and decades. The first came from the Coterie of Moldavia. An old man complained to the municipality about a terrible buzzing that would echo across his fields for hours at a time. And then the letters stopped, and 3 months later his body was discovered. Part of the reason it took so long was the complete absence of the stench of deterioration. It was thought he'd been embalmed in his own bed, all fluids drained and organs removed with surgical precision. Cause of death was ruled as exsanguination. The next came from the forest of the Cameroonian highlands. A married couple and their child had gone out on a routine hiking expedition and excitedly texted a friend about an immense bird they'd seen that had briefly blotted out the sun. That text was the last time they were ever seen or heard from. A week later, a farmer saw one of their skins fluttering in the breeze. That's it, just the hollowed, transparent, dried-out set of skin. The farmer had attempted to catch it, but the skin blew away in the wind like discarded wrapping paper and was never recovered. That was just the start. He had a whole laundry list of articles, and poring over them brought tears to my eyes. Oh, God, those poor people. What kind of creature could even do that sort of thing? My eyes drifted back to Katie, and I wondered again what laid beneath that disguise. Given the age of that photo, was she even truly a child? For all I know, she could be older than I am. Another text. "This place is playing you for a fool. I know what's really going on here. Meet me in your office." In my dinky little office? Nothing. Doubt crept in. Was this some sort of test set up by the headmistress? I was just about to take my leave when suddenly an unfamiliar voice opened up from directly above me. "Mr. Vermeil." I looked up and saw a face staring down at me from the vent grate in the ceiling. No, not a face. It had all the features of a face. Eyes, ears, nose, smiling mouth, but all arranged in the wrong order, as if plastered wantonly to a discolored lumpen dough ball of flesh. It felt like something out of a dream. I stammered blithely, uselessly. The meat started to push forward, dividing itself into 5 neat sections through the slits in the vent grill, like a human body being pushed through a pastry cutter. I watched as tissues and sinews and raw bone dropped to the floor like melting candle wax, melding into a puddle of viscera that grew solid as more biomass gelled with its bulbous form. And in time, that puddle of meat dripping from the ceiling became a man. That smiling face was staring me down again, now in proper arrangement, yet no less deranged. He was handsome, actually, with a fit figure as perfect as his fine gelled hair. Nude, but sexless as a Ken doll. I finally started to run for help, but was stopped by the feeling of something digging into the side of my neck hard enough to draw blood. A jagged bone had jut from his wrist like the point of a spear. You had your chance to go running away. It's too late now, he whispered. Oh, don't look at me like that. I only wanted to make your acquaintance. I'm a big fan of yours, after all. A fan? I've always admired the sort of man willing to betray his own species for a quick buck, he mocked. This is nothing personal, really. I'm just here to do my job, just like you. In fact, I was thinking we could work together. I felt like I might faint. Seeing this, he let me sit down at my desk, albeit with the bone still to my throat. What are you? Call me Saladin, he answered, in a tone that made it clear it was a pseudonym. And, well, I'd like to say that I'm still human, but that would be a lie, wouldn't it? Used to be, but in my line of work, I've had to find ways to even the playing field. I noticed the irony of being accused of betraying my species by a man who seemed to have forsaken his altogether. I was reminded of an old Nietzsche quote, something about he who fights monsters. Don't you mock me, boy! His face suddenly soured, as if he'd read my thoughts. You'd become some breed of horror, too, if you'd kept consorting with these unnatural things. When dealing with matters of the occult for long, there are two options: sacrifice your life or your humanity. There is no third path. His cocky grin returned. Just ask poor William. Just hearing that name was like a punch to the lungs. It knocked the breath from me. William? You? Of course I knew him. He was one of my feelers. I posted him out here to see if it would lure out the hunting dogs. Prove this place is really as the rumors say. And sure enough. A streak of rage rose in my chest, battling the fear. And now, you want me to be your next useful idiot? I always like a man on the inside, he taunted. I only need to kill one child, just a single one, and this entire initiative will fall apart like a house of playing cards. All the trust the headmistress has built up with the parents, oh, they'd all tear her limb from limb. He saw the look of horror on my face and laughed. Don't tell me you're actually loyal to her. Did she warn you of the danger you were in when you took this job? Has she done anything to your benefit? Do you really think she cares? Why do you think she even hired you? Just out of the kindness of her heart? She's a big believer in giving second chances to losers with a drinking problem and a rap sheet? He cackled. No, it's because you have nobody. You're a loser, all alone. So in case one of those kids gets the munchies one day, nobody will even notice you're missing. Sure, they may look harmless now, but make no mistake, sooner or later, some of those kids will need to feed. Isn't their fault, it's in their biology, their very being. They were made to prey on people like you and me. And you're planning on helping them blend in, surround themselves with clueless pedestrians with tasty blood in their veins and meat on their bones. You don't see what's going to happen if this initiative succeeds? He could see it on my face. The doubt was creeping in. He grinned, retracting his blade and patting me on the shoulder. One kid. That's all I need. I just need to get one alone. But they're too smart for that. Always travel in packs, sleep in that bunker down the mountain. But for you, it'd be trivial. As if on cue, there was a small knock on the door. A big grin crossed over Saladin's face. He held a finger to his lips as he melted through the slats of my closet, disappearing into the darkness just before my door went swinging open. There stood Katie, eyes low. She didn't seem to notice the sweat on my brow, the drop of blood on my neck, or the stupefied expression on my face. Her gaze was on the floor, nervous, as she sat across from me. "Mr. Vermeil, I was thinking, and I know I said I'm not supposed to tell you certain stuff about the school and all, but I think you deserve to hear it, you know? Just don't tell the headmistress what I told you, okay?" My throat felt dry. I could hardly think. Saladin's words echoed in my head. Just one child. But seeing Katie's face reminded me that I didn't need to pick sides in some war I didn't understand. Sitting across from me was a child I'd been tasked with protecting. That was all I needed to know. Thank you, Katie, but I really think you should go play with your friends. It's really no trouble. I don't know why she wants to keep so many secrets from you anyway. It's not like you won't figure it out sooner or later. She didn't notice the droplets of liquid meat that were Saladin blowing in behind her like raindrops caught in a heavy wind. By the time flesh and sinew reformed itself over her face to muffle her scream, he'd already had her ensnared. It was like an anaconda coiling around its prey, the way those ropes of tendrilled, bubbling flesh entwined themselves around her, and Saladin's face emerged from those slivers of meat.
"Little Miss Kaylee, isn't it? Must be my lucky day. Your mother is a busy woman, you know. My client lost every single little person he loved to that thirst of hers."
He was drawing something from his throat, some kind of black dagger, pulling it up like a sword swallower. I don't know, I wasn't paying attention. I'd leapt into action the moment he was occupied. Maybe all those horror movies paid off after all. If there was anything they taught me, it's that any creature built of constantly morphing flesh always had the same weakness: fire. All it took from my desk was a half-empty can of deodorant and my dad's old lighter. I plied my makeshift flamethrower to whatever part of that oozing fleshy mass looked the most exposed, pink, and vulnerable. The heat and size of the erupting flames surprised even myself. He squealed like a stuck pig through unnatural vocal cords, and a tendril of flesh batted me across the room like I was weightless. But it had worked. Whatever parts of him the flames had touched were left bubbling and frothing, gooey and viscous like melted wax. But as he thrashed and whined, Katie seized the moment and let out her tongue. No, not a tongue. It was a proboscis. A long, black, spiral tube, like you'd see on a butterfly. She'd tried to jab it into his neck, but he jerked his head at the last moment, and it ended up somewhere far worse, pierced through his eye. I thought the formless flesh that was Saladin was terrifying enough, but it was more terrifying still to watch it fade away, to see that flesh turn pale and veins wither like dying vines over taut, throbbing muscles. I realized she was sucking his blood through that proboscis like it was a drinking straw, and whatever other life essence flowed through the thing that was once a man. In seconds, his eyes and cheeks sunk in his face like he was aging decades. I could only imagine what that proboscis would do to an ordinary human like myself. She was an inexperienced hunter. Saladin, wailing now, managed to worm his way out of her grip before the job was done. He took off through the window, seeming to evaporate as he smashed through the glass, letting the wind carry off those droplets of meat and empty veins as he scattered himself to the breeze. And yet again, another horror had gone as quickly as it had come. Katie pounced on me. I'd cried out for a moment, assuming she meant to turn that proboscis on me. But instead, she wrapped me in a hug.
Mr. Vermeil, you saved me. I know that we could trust you. Oh, you're the best teacher ever.
I hugged her back, just as the headmistress and the hounds from security came kicking down the door and found an office covered in bubbling viscera. I told the headmistress everything. In retrospect, I was shockingly honest. She was just as stoic as always through most of it, but the mention of the word Saladin inspired a look of horror I'd never seen in her before.
Him? No, he couldn't have found us,
she whispered to herself, cupping a hand over her mouth. I'm laying in the infirmary now, being cared for by a nurse with a third eye and no interest in hiding it. That would have horrified me before. Now, I just cracked a smile. For better or worse, I've picked my side. I'm sticking by these kids, even if it leads me straight into hell.
That took a turn for the heartwarming, didn't it? Although I'm still feeling kind of confused about monster kids. Setting that aside, parts 2 and 3 covered a lot of ground. Our teacher encountered a bit of static, if you'll pardon the pun, with a concerned parent. It was an electrifying experience. Okay, enough. But he was rescued by the Hastings twins, and we discovered why they never speak. After that incident, he was let in on the big secret of the school. And it's a good thing, too, because there was a hunter waiting in the wings to pick off one of his students. I sure hope the pay is good. I've quit jobs because I had to walk too much or the commute was too long. You can bet I'd be long gone at the first sign of monster home invasion. The dust from my tires would have long settled before anyone produces a proboscis. If you enjoyed this story, you're in luck. There are 2 more parts to come. And with the author's continued blessing, I have plans to present them here. If you just can't wait, you can check out the complete story right now by following the link in the description. Head over there and show the author some love. Please also leave a like on this video and subscribe to hear more delicious stories like this one. Whatever you do, tread carefully around the children and don't fall asleep.